All right, Brian, we got some defensive keys to victory to discuss. And this should be a fun one because I said this before the show started. I thought it leaving the game, it was enhanced for me after watching the film. To me, I feel like this was one of the best defensive efforts, you know, games that this Irish defense has played all season. I mean, they were just really, really, really good. IU just didn't know where the pressure was coming from. They couldn't recover. I mean, it was textbook defense and how to play defense in a big game situation. But let's get specific with the defensive keys to victory. First one up is dominate up the middle. And obviously what that means is defensive tackles, linebackers. It's like baseball. You got to be strong up the middle if you want to be good. Yeah, safeties specifically, got to be strong up the middle. Same thing applies for a football defense. You've got to be strong up the middle. Were they in this game?
Definitely a check on this one. I mean, close to a plus, but I don't want to completely go there because there's definitely there's some fits from the linebackers that need to be better. There's a couple times, some of those early runs where I thought, Howard Cross got whooped early on. He didn't look 100% at all, Vince. He definitely didn't have the same burst he had. I'm hoping that in the next game he'll just get healthier and healthier and healthier. He didn't play
12
great.
days off is not a bad
to the point
situation.
where you had said I don't think he played much. He had over 50 snaps, but he just didn't do anything noticeable. But like he was out there, he competed. You could just tell you could tell he didn't have juice coming off the ball. A couple times I thought Riley or Gabriel Rubio got sealed on a couple of those stretch plays early on where they were able to gash him, but those were few and far between. I thought the middle played great. I thought the defense, Riley Mills before he got hurt was destroying Indiana's offensive line. I mean, it was like we talk about your dudes got to be dudes. He was a dude. There was a play where he was actually slanted against Carter Smith. Their 6'5", 315-pound left tackle and just threw him to get in the backfield. There's another play early, Vince. It was after the interception where he just destroyed the guard. And the guy held him because he was about to get whooped, and that backed him up 10 yards, for holding. What we do is usually you watch the line and I watch downfield when we're watching games live. So I didn't see what the hold was, and he goes, "Oh, they held Riley." You're like me, like, "Oh, they held Riley big time." He played phenomenal. When he went down, they weren't as good up the middle, but they were still good, right? Like they weren't dominant like Riley was, but they were doing their job up front. That's how I felt about it. And I thought Donovan Heinisch continued to play good football that he's been playing for the last month of the regular season, but they weren't quite as good when Riley went out. But again, still won the battle there. But I thought the linebackers played very well. This is one of the most aggressive games I've seen Drake Bowen play at Notre Dame. I mean, he was flying down. And some of them were on design stunts. Like first play of the game, he just blew into the A-gap, Vince, and just blew that play up. Like Josh Burnham made the tackle for loss, but Drake's the one that made him cut back inside. There was 3 or 4 times where the running back had to cut inside and somebody else made the play, but it was Drake blowing up an offensive lineman or shooting into the gap to force the running back to cut early. I've said this a million times. I'll say it again because it's always true. The further back behind the line you can force a running back to make his cut, the better it is for your football team. So like the play Josh Burnham made on the first play of the game, that's a great job by Josh Burnham, but that was great team defense because it was Drake destroying the A-gap and blowing it up and forcing that running back to cut into Josh that allowed Josh to make that tackle for loss. And I thought Drake, I mean, he had like 2, first of all, Notre Dame scored people. Stop being so dang stingy with assisted tackles.
Seriously.
Right? Drake Bowen had more than 2 tackles in his football game, okay? Just saying. But he didn't have like 10. But what made Drake so effective is he was doing his job of blowing up blockers and forcing running backs to early cut, to cut 3-4 yards behind the line of scrimmage, which allowed Jack to rally to the ball, which allowed the backside ends to rally to the ball, allowed the safeties to come flying downhill and eat up cutbacks and things like that. I thought the inside linebackers played very well in that regard. I thought Jack Kaiser did a really good job with pursuit. There's a play where I think it was Drake, but basically he was running inside zone and they blew it up and he cuts outside and Jack was going on it was Jalen Sneed. He was moving to his right and he takes Jalen Sneed and he kind of moves him into the gap he was supposed to be in while the play is going on. And then the running back, it gets bottled up. The running back cuts backside. We've seen this running back do this a million times this year, Vince, and every time he bounces it for 5-10 yards where they kind of wash the line down and take off, and Jack plants on his right foot and explodes outside and tackles the guy for like a 1-yard gain. And you're like, that's what we keep talking about. Like, that running back thought, uh-oh, here I go. And Jack was on him like that. I mean, boom, flies to the football.
Yeah.
That was impressive. I thought the Notre Dame linebackers didn't make a ton of plays on the ball. Like, if you look at their stat numbers, Vince, they're not going to blow you away. You know, like Drake had 2 tackles. Thank you. My voice is shot, so I had to text Angela. Can you get me another dew, please? Because I'm about to lose it. Yes, please. Yeah. In there. Thank you. She's going to make me some hot tea. You know, Jack had 5 tackles. Jaden Osborne had 3. Jalen Sneed had 2. Drake had 2. Right? But that's not a lot of tackles. But here's the thing. Drake had 2 tackles, 1.5 tackles for loss. Jalen Sneed only had 2 tackles, but one of them was a tackle for loss. Jaden Osborne only had 3 tackles, but 2 of them were tackles for loss. You know what I mean? Like, they were super impactful in that regard, Vince. But the other thing, too, is they were blowing up runs to where they were forcing those early cutbacks and with Notre Dame, what are the 2 runs that worked for Indiana? They were runs where they were stayed on their path, stretch, and then cut at or past the line of scrimmage. That's what you want to be. When they were cut behind the line, they're done. Notre Dame's too fast. You're done.
Yep.
And the linebackers, even though, again, the numbers weren't great as far as like, oh, Drake had 10 tackles or Jack had 10 tackles. I mean, the tackles for loss, I repeat, 1, 2, 3, 4.5 tackles for loss from your inside linebackers in this game. That doesn't even include how many tackles for loss, because Notre Dame had 10 tackles for loss in this game, Vince. But I'd say not only did they have the 4.5 that they had, but I'd be willing to bet you that half of them, if we broke down the film and counted them, half of the other tackles for loss would have been plays where it was actually the linebacker that forced the running back to cut into the hands of somebody else. I'd be willing to bet you that's the case.
Right.
And by the way, that did tie their team high on the season with 10. It tied the Florida State team high.
Right.
Of 10 this season. So in the last 2 years, they've only had 10 or more tackles for loss 3 times. Florida State, USC last year, and Indiana on Saturday. And linebackers played a huge, huge role in that. And they're going to – it's like that's why Drake Bowen's that dude.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Right? That's why Jaden Osbury's that dude. That's why Jack Kaiser's that dude. You see it. Anyone that's going to tell me that these kids aren't fast, I actually had somebody who I respect, you know who it is, tell me that these linebackers don't play fast.
Really?
Not telling me that after this game. You
Yeah.
better. Otherwise, I'm like, well, you're just biased at this point in time because they played fast.
Yeah.
Real fast.
Yep. No doubt about it. I'm with you 100%. This is borderline, like, you know, strength up the middle is borderline a check plus for me. I understand where you're coming from. You and I were talking about this during the game about, you know, what Indiana was trying to do offensively, especially in the run game and where they had success and where they didn't have success. There were times where they tried to run it up the middle, and they might as well have been running into a wall. Like, it wasn't happening running up the middle. All of their success was outside, like you said, and they were stretch plays and some things like that. When they just tried to run like a straight toss or, you know, straight, like, get to the outside play, they didn't have success doing that. But it was more like the stretch, like da-da-da-da-da, and then cut kind of a situation. They did have a little bit of success doing that. But when they tried to run straight up the middle, you know, it wasn't happening. And that's where I'm teetering on the check plus area, just because in the run game, they had nothing up the middle. But I mean, I know it's bigger than that too. So
I think if Riley Mills wouldn't have got hurt, it would have ended up being a plus.
That's fair. I think that's fair.
Because because if you talk about the way he was playing combined with the way that Drake was playing and the way Jack and you know what I mean, like that would have made it a plus in my opinion.
Yeah,
if they would have done that.
That's fair. No, that's fair. I think that's absolutely a fair assessment. So, checks from both of us on that one. Next key to victory on the defensive side of the football: be disciplined, leverage double moves. Switch routes, misdirection, all of those different things. Can you be disciplined in the back, in the front, all of the above? How do you think they did?
Well, Vince, you kind of talked about this earlier. I think you made a comment about how just they were just where they needed to be the entire game. I think you were, it was, I don't know if that was during the show or if that was with you and I talking before the
I think
show,
it was that. Yeah.
but
Yeah.
you made a comment like this is one of the best execution. Well, I'll let you, I mean, I'll let you say it because like you nailed it in our conversation before about how disciplined this team was against a team that's not easy to be disciplined against.
Right. It was, I had mentioned that this is the best team defensive effort that I've ever seen this season from this defense. Like we've seen a lot of individual dominance in games, and we've seen position dominance in this game, position group dominance in this game, in games. This was the best team defense that I've seen. Now, the team defense allowed Notre Dame individuals to be successful, and it kind of harkens all the way back to the beginning of the show when we were talking about Marcus Freeman and team success then leads to individual success. Look, Xavier Watts had one of the best games I've ever seen a safety have, right? I mean, he was unbelievable in this game, but he was unbelievable in this game because of what the team defense looked like and what he was able to do off of that. And I thought that it was the same way, similar to what you were talking about with the linebackers. They may not have made the play, but they forced the ball outside so a defensive end could make the play or a corner could make the play or whatever. They communicated on the back end extremely well, passing off routes, doing some things on the back end, that you need to be able to communicate and do. I mean, it was the best team defense that I've seen this play. And then that allowed the athleticism and the speed to really shine because they were in the right place, doing the right thing, and then they were able to just fire out of a cannon and make a play. And we just saw that over and over and over in this game, and that's what stood out to me. It was a team effort, but then individuals were able to shine within that team effort, and that's where I was.
Well, you talk about Xavier Watts, that huge pick, but Jack Kaiser undercutting that crossing route, and Jordan Kaiser playing it over top, or Jordan Clark playing it over top. I mean, they literally had that guy perfectly bracketed.
Yes.
And
it was a terrible read on the part of Rourke.
He tries to defend that ball in there, and it's like you get picked off. But it was. And again, I could literally point to almost every mistake that I like big mistake they remember them making. You know what I mean? It was. Christian Gray had really good coverage on that first ball he got beat. He just was a little late looking back. I mean, the guy, it's a great catch. He almost tips it. It hits the guy in the knees. He bounces it up and he catches it. Like you made him earn every yard, Vince. There was a I think it was Drake that had a run fit that I didn't like, that I thought he needed to get around to the A gap and allowed an inside cut lane. But even then it's like, you're like, oh my gosh, that's a big run lane. Next, it's a 7-yard gain because they just swarmed to the ball so fast. Yeah. That's another thing that Kurt Signetti said when he's listing off all the things that they do well on defense. And he's like, and they just swarm to the football. And he's absolutely right.
Defense,
I mean,
man,
you think you're about to rip one off, and then all of a sudden 3 guys just close on you in a hurry. And there was a couple times where, I thought the edge rushers went a little too wide. There was a couple times, like I said, Rubio got sealed inside. One time Howard Cross got knocked off the ball. I mean, you can point to some of those instances, but they were few and far between. And there was almost always in every instance somebody overcoming that play.
Yeah.
But you talk about team defense. I mean, that's partly why nobody outside of Xavier Watts had great individual stats, is because so many different guys made plays. I mean, nobody had more than 5 tackles outside of Xavier Watts, but it's like Clark had 5, Adon had 5, Kaiser had 5, Jaden had 3, Hurd had 2, Snead had 2, Logan Thomas had 2, Leonard Moore had 2, Christian Gray had 2, Drake Bowen had 2, Josh Burnham had 2 in a tackle for loss, Gabriel Ruby had 2, Riley Mills had 2. I mean, it just was like, you had 10 tackles for loss. Only one guy had more than 1. I'm sorry, Drake Bowen had 1.5. Osborne had 2. It was like a half, a 1,
right,
1, 1.5, 1, 1, 2. This is a bunch of guys making plays. It wasn't just, wow, did you watch so-and-so take that game over? Now, Riley Mills might have done that if he'd have stayed in the game. He was on the verge of that. But, I mean, it also speaks volumes about how they didn't really do – Indiana couldn't do anything on them in the second half until they called off the dogs without Riley Mills.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just speaks volumes about how good the team defense was. So just played within the system. You and I talked. We got our answer, Vince. You and I asked the question, and it was, how much will having extra time to prepare for this offense help out Al Golden and the staff, because you have better players than them, but they're schemed up really well. Can you be prepared for that? And the game plan was outstanding, and it was. I've heard people say it's not a very complex defense, and I understand where they're coming from, but I think that's underselling it. They make it look easier than it is. I mean, they're rolling different people and asking people to do different things. It doesn't look like a complicated defense unless you really study it week to week to week to week, and you realize it's actually not as easy as people make it seem to be. They just play it so well, they make it look simple. And
they're very comfortable. Like the defense is very comfortable with Al Golden's scheme. And I mean, yes, this is year 3. I get that, but it is very obvious that these guys are very comfortable with what Al Golden wants to do, and they're thriving in it. I mean, look, they were always good, but they're thriving in it now. It's like they're all on the same page as far as what Al Golden wants from this defense and what their role is within the defensive scheme. And it feels obvious to me because they all know what the other guy is doing at this point. You know what I mean? It's not just, hey, do your job. Like, I get that, but it just feels like with the way they play, they know what the guy next to him is going to do. So they know they can do their thing and they don't have to worry about it. And they know that their teammate, their brother is going to do what they need to do. It's kind of hard to articulate, but it's so clear to me that Al Golden has his pulse on what this defense is and who this defense is. And these kids are just executing it, man. And it's like a second nature at this point. And it's fun to watch. Like when a defense is playing like Notre Dame's defense with the speed and athleticism that they have, it's just fun to watch, man.
Well, I mean, you've got smart kids. Number one. For sure. Notre Dame recruits smart. And that's not the tired, lazy, oh, you have to be smart to come. No, they look for that. When they're evaluating Dallas Golden and Jadon Blair and Mark Zachary, they're not just looking at film of their athleticism. They're talking to him about the game. I mean, I've talked to Jadon Blair about this. We've talked to other guys about this. And they're like, we're just sitting in the film room and they're just talking to us and they're just coaching us up because they want to see. Now, the players just think, hey, they're just learning their teach, but they want to see what the recall is like. They want to see what the responses are like. They want to see how the football mind of these guys think. So you want to know partly why Notre Dame is so high on Jadon Blair and Dallas Golden and guys like that, Mark Zachary and Cree Thomas. It's not only they physically talented players, but they know that they have high football IQs. They're very smart football players, which allows you to do more. And also, it also includes great teaching because you're teaching it at a high level and in a way where they are able to receive it. And in this game, especially, you saw that, Vince. And it's it's a plus. I mean, I don't know if I said check at the beginning or what, but I mean, it's a plus.
It's a plus. Yeah.
It's a plus.
Yeah, completely agree with that. Third key to victory for the defense was constant pressure on Rourke, the IU quarterback. Thoughts on that one?
Vince, I'm very curious to hear what your thoughts are on this one. I'm giving him just when I'm like after I say it. I thought the pressure on Rourke was good at times. I give him a check because it was good enough, and it was good enough early to kind of get to him and kind of cause him to make some mistakes. But I think the things that hurt Curtis Rourke more were the manner in which they disguised their coverages. I think kind of mentally got in his head a little bit. I didn't think the pressure was as consistent as I wanted it to be. I give him a check still, but it's not a real convincing check. It's like a check because you did enough. The thing for me is they only had 12 pressures according to Pro Football Focus, but 5 of them resulted on hits on the quarterback. And I'd say it's probably a little bit more than that, but I would have probably counted them with a couple more pressures than that. But overall, I didn't think they were great in this area. Like, this wasn't like Ohio State where they just overwhelmed Curtis Rourke with pressures. It wasn't like that at all. They overwhelmed them with coverage. They covered at an elite level in this game. And like, even when guys were getting beat, they were getting beat because you had to make a great ball and a great catch out with one exception. But here's why the pressure, I say, was good enough. There was one play where Rod Hurd got smoked on a corner route. Smoked. Like a good ball, it might be 6. But he overthrew the guy. Why? Because he threw it off his back foot and they had pressure on him. And I think it was Drake actually had the pressure on him. And so he sailed the ball. So when you needed it, you got there. But I thought as the game went on, the linebacker started to, from a pressure, started to kind of hunt for contact a little bit more than I would have liked on some of those pressures. The timing, I think Indiana adjusted their cadence a little bit. Early in the game, they were going a little slower, and Notre Dame's linebackers were teeing off on them. I think they started to mix up their tempo a little bit later in the game, and a couple times it kept the pressure from going. But it was good enough, but it wasn't great. And especially when Riley Mills went down, I think that hurt that pressure a little bit as well. But I did think that the edge pressure was pretty decent in this game, though, Vince.
Yeah.
Like you had Junior had that one pass breakup where he beat the guy and he was getting held.
Yeah.
Up, tipped the pass. I thought Bryce Young had a couple really nice edge
really
pressures.
That one where he came off the edge.
Oh my god!
And the offensive tackle just almost completely
no
whiffed.
chance.
Like he had no idea that Bryce his first move was as quick as it was. Like it was over at the snap.
Yeah.
And I mean, he just came around and made the play. I was like,
and there was a couple times too. I think Notre Dame baited Indiana into running the ball. There was a couple times on third down. People were like, why are they running the ball there?
I'm like, third and long.
Yeah. And you're like, no, they're doing that because a lot of times they were in 2-down territory. And so, like, if you're in 3rd and 10 at midfield or 45 going in, you may say, hey, look, we're going to pop a run right here because if we can get 7 or 8 yards, we're now in 2-down territory.
Yeah.
And whereas if we throw an incomplete pass, we're punting. And there was a couple times I thought Notre Dame showed an edge pressure that baited Indiana trying to pop a quick inside zone, and then they slanted into the zone. And then there was another time they ran it, and I think it might have been Riley Mills, but Riley Mills just destroyed the tackle. And then Jalen Steed came screaming off the backside edge, and they blew it up. So that was part of the pressure, too. Even though that didn't impact Curtis Rourke, I think it did impact the run game. That's why some people say, man, it was real conservative running the ball on third down. I don't think that was being conservative. That was part of being in 2-down territory. And they're thinking, like they've done all year, we're going to pop a little 6 inside zone. We're going to minimum get 5 or 6 and put us in 2-down territory and going for it on 4th down territory, or we might pop this one for a first down. And guess what? They'd been doing that all year, Vince. But that's where the interior just whooped them, and then they were able to get some of those linebacker pressures off the edge that really shut it down. And so those weren't conservative play calls. That was Al Golden baiting them into running the football, and then he would slant the defensive line right into it. Or like in the case with Riley Mills, he just said, "You're not going to get between me and the football. Sorry." I mean, it was unreal.
I want to add just a little twist to this as well, Brian, and you hit all the great points about the front, what they were able to do or not able to do at certain times. You know, when I saw this key, and I didn't read your description, I just saw the key, right? And it was get pressure on Rourke, or keep the pressure on Rourke, or whatever it was. For me, in this particular game, I feel like he was also pressured by the secondary because they were in his head, and there were times where he was making throws where he was not stepping into those throws. He was not confident about where he was going with the football and things like that. And so while I agree with you that I don't, the front didn't get the pressure that I would like on a consistent basis, I do think the way the secondary was covering, I think there was some pressure, between the ears as well. Yeah. And then he was he was slow on his reads. He wasn't confident on his reads, and he made some real questionable throws that he just did not execute. There were some times where the ball just went, right into the dirt, or, he just missed a guy, that kind of a deal. And so I think that's part of it. I think that's part of it. I'm like a check here because I think they did enough to really affect Curtis Rourke and what he wanted to do back there and what IU wanted to do as a whole. And I think that's also why they were running the ball on third down to a degree, because I don't think they trusted necessarily that they were going to be able to do some things with the ball in Curtis Rourke's hands throwing the football. I do think that. And I think that's part. I agree that they were probably in 2-down territory and all of those things. but there's a lot of teams out there that would run a pass play to get half of that back, or, to get closer and make it a more manageable 4th down attempt, those kinds of things. And they were handing the ball off. Like I just felt like Notre Dame was in the head of Curtis Rourke in this game. And I think the secondary had something to do with that. So I just wanted a little twist on that. So
what did you think of the pressure? Do you agree with me there, or do you think it was more effective than I do?
I feel like it was more effective early, and I think a lot of that had to do with Riley Mills. And because it was effective early, they almost didn't have to be as effective late. Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, but I wanted that helped to hit with some of those RPOs they started hitting the second quarter to move. They converted a couple 3rd and longs because they were able.
That's frustrating.
So yeah, but that's a good. I mean, again, to get it to 27-3,
right?
You were making a lot of stuff, and it wasn't like Indiana outside that first drive was moving the ball into scoring zone easily, and then they were just getting stopped or turning it over. I mean, they'd cross midfield a couple times and then just get stoned.
Yeah, I feel like they did enough early on that Curtis Rourke was seeing some ghosts in this game. Now, I wanted it more. Which
is what the Indiana fans told us wasn't going to happen because he's so experienced and he's played against Big Ten competition all year.
He's from Canada. He was birthed in the snow, from what it sounded like. So it's all good.
But he wasn't birthed having to face the Notre Dame defense.
This is also true. All right, final defensive key to victory that we need to revisit here was just get the ball. I assume that means turnovers, turn IU over, do those different things. They got the big turnover, obviously, early on that led to points. What say you on the get the ball key?
They're good. I mean, they got the ball they needed to get. There weren't as many opportunities in this game, Vince, to get the ball because I felt like he missed a lot of opportunity. I mean, he was missing bad. He made a couple great throws on go routes. I mean, the one that he beat Christian Gray on early and then for the touchdown, but there's a lot of times he was throwing the ball out of bounds. And we did not see that a lot from Curtis Rourke on film.
Right.
I mean, he was dropping back and he would just it's like Leonard Moore was so thoroughly covering his boundary receiver. He was just throwing the ball out of bounds. Or he just was so rattled that he couldn't keep the ball in bounds. But I like to think that I have a hard time believing that's the case.
Yeah.
Because, that we just never have seen that from him. But so there weren't quite as many of those get the ball opportunities as there have been in the past. But the one they got early was huge. I mean, that was a huge, huge, huge play. Because, winning the turnover battle is important. Notre Dame did not win the turnover battle. I think it was 1-1, right?
Yeah.
They both had one
turnover.
Both
interceptions, I believe.
But Notre Dame's was so big because it negated the one that Indiana had.
Correct.
Yep. And that made it big. So I'm giving them a check here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Because the one turnover they did have was absolutely massive. I mean, it obviously led to the 98-yard touchdown run and, all of those things. And on top of that, like you also said, I just feel like I'm repeating you. I apologize, but it negated the bad interception that Notre Dame threw. I mean, it took that one, it wiped it right off the board. So it was a twofold interception, wipes out the one that Notre Dame had, and then also led to points. And it wasn't just that it led to points. Like, it would have been great if they would have went on like a 16-play drive at that point that led to a touchdown. But they still had the momentum of that interception from a crowd standpoint. And then the very next play, you rip off a 98-yard run. Like, they were eating out of Notre Dame's hands at that point, as far as the crowd was concerned. I mean, you and I were like tackling each other, on the balcony up there. Like, we were fired up, and we're pretty calm usually, you know what I mean? And so if we were fired up, what does that
even
say
outside,
about the rest of the rest of the stadium? So the timing of it was perfect. And then the answer by the offense off of it was perfect as well. So even though it was 1-1, it was like 1.9 to 1, like it just from the way that it affected the game. But you're right. They didn't really have a lot of opportunities to turn the ball over.
Yeah.
Not a lot of punts.
It didn't make a lot of opportunities. Like, again, there weren't a lot of tip balls that were potentially catchable. There wasn't a lot of throws where like the corners were stepping in front of slants. They were kind of giving those little quick, easy inside slant routes in the second half of the game. They weren't giving them to him early. It's just why, I mean, he almost a couple times Rourke he saw that they were locked up and he just threw remember that first pass of the game, or the first, I think it was the first third down, where they ran an RPO and they just bracketed it, and he just threw the ball 5 feet behind his receiver into the ground.
Yeah.
Like, oh my God, what a terrible throw. You're like, that's not a terrible throw. That's a quarterback running an RPO, and he sees it's covered, and he can't take off running like Riley Leonard does, so he just throws the ball 5 feet behind where nobody's going to catch it.
Yeah.
Curtis Rourke is not that inaccurate. It's that route's covered. I don't have a next option because we're running an RPO.
Right.
And they baited him into it, and then he's got to throw it behind.
Right.
There were some throws like that too, and that's where he was smart not to allow those type of plays to turn into like that's where Curtis Rourke actually did a pretty good job. Is plays where Notre Dame would bait a quarterback into throwing in other games, he would not do, and he would just throw it away, throw a check down, do something different with it. You know, where there's a couple times they ran in cuts where Notre Dame was trying to bait him into throwing that cross or the in cut, and he wasn't taking the bait. And so he'd take a check down or go to the next guy or throw it away or get sacked. And that limited some of the turnovers as well.
Sure.
In this game.
Any other observations about the defense before we move on?
I mean, we covered a lot of that in the opener, Vince.
Agreed.
I was so impressed by their preparation. I was so impressed by the speed at which they played the game.
Yep.
While also playing discipline. Like the concern you can have, Vince, in a game like this where they're so amped up and they're so fired up is they play a little out of control.
Sure.
And they didn't. And it was really, really impressive team defense. And I was just a huge kudos to the Notre Dame defensive staff for getting this group ready to play.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm annoyed that they gave up the 2 touchdowns late. I understand why Al Golden did it. We have a super chat about it, so I'll leave my explanation for the super chat so we don't repeat ourselves. But it's like when your biggest beef from a game is you gave up 2 garbage touchdowns. I would have liked to seen you win by 24 instead of 10 in a game that was never really in doubt past the middle of the second quarter. You're in, it's first world problems right there, brother. Just tremendous job of getting this group ready to play against a well-coached Indiana football team. And I watched some knucklehead on YouTube, some real popular Georgia Bulldogs show they put on the board, and it's got like 30,000 subscribers. It's like, Indiana's not a well-coached football team. I'm like, what you don't know, because you have not watched either of these teams play before, what you don't know is that you just paid Notre Dame the greatest compliment you could imagine by calling Indiana not a well-coached football team. But if you had never watched Indiana before Friday night, Vince, you would come away thinking that's not a great, really well-coached team, especially at least on offense anyway. That's what you'd come away thinking if you never watched them before. You and I watched them a ton, and we know that's an incredibly well-coached football team, which is why they're here, which is why they're 11-1. And Notre Dame made them look not well coached because of how well they were prepared, how well they executed. And huge shout out to the players, huge props to the players for and the coaches for that game plan and executing that game plan. And I'll tell you something that's funny. I was ran into a friend the night before the game who's part of the program, and we were out to dinner with my family. I saw him, and he says to me, and that's why I didn't say it beforehand, but he says to me, he goes, "We're going to kick the out of them tomorrow night." Never has said anything like that to me before. Very calm, mild-mannered guy. Hey, it's a great opponent. We're just going to give it. I mean, that's how this team, like that's how prepared this team was to dominate. This wasn't a, hey, we've got to win the game. It was to dominate. It's like they just knew, watch film, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to kick the, and they did. I mean, I know it 27. That game was not even close.
No.
Like not even close. And
I do feel like the vast majority of people understand that. You know what I mean? If it doesn't fit their narrative, then fine. But like
even
the
Scott
vast
Van
majority
Pelt said that, Vince. We were in the car. He's like, guys, this score is not nearly as close as that game actually was. You know what I mean? Like they scored a garbage touchdown. They got an onside kick and scored another garbage touchdown. I mean, but I mean, I was very impressed by how this team played.
Yeah,
very impressed with it, and a lot of young players. This is the biggest stage they've ever been on. Really, Drake Bowen, Leonard Moore, Christian Gray, Adon Schuler. Those guys didn't play meaningful downs on defense last year against Ohio State. You know, games like that. This is really. I mean, they played against Texas A&M, but this is their biggest. This is the biggest stage they've ever been on, and they played like they were vets.
Mm-hmm.
And that says a lot about their preparation, Vince. High level execution comes from high level of preparation.
Yep.
And we saw that in this game. So that's
Agreed.
my overall big picture.
Beautiful.
And as in the point you made earlier, you were spot on, Vince. This is some of the best team defense we've seen from them. This might be the best team defensive performance when you consider the moment, the opponent, and how they played.
Yep.
Were they more dominant against other teams? Yes, because those teams stink.
Right.
But as far as like the level of, I mean, again, when they scored, what was it, Vince? When Notre Dame scored with 4:50 left to make it 27-3 game,
yeah.
Indiana had 152 yards of offense at that moment. That's just pure dominance.
Yep. That's exactly right. Exactly right. All right. Well, that's going to do it for our defensive keys revisited, everybody. We still have another segment to get to, so don't go anywhere. But hey, in the meantime, hit that like button, that subscribe button, that notification bell, share with your family and friends. Of course, jump on the boards@irishbreakdown.com. An annual membership is the gift that keeps on giving. And there's only a few days before Christmas. So if you need that last little stocking stuffer, boards@irishbreakdown.com, folks. I'm just saying, get after it. You will be the most loved person at Christmas. I'm just saying, if you're looking for that title, that's what you'll get if you get somebody an annual membership to the board. So boards@irishbreakdown.com.